what is the best autofocus mode for wildlife, especially bird photography, on the Nikon Z6II, and which autofocus modes you should stay away from, coming up. A few days ago I was at Black Duck Lagoon here, and I bumped into a photographer who was just starting out. They'd upgraded from a Nikon D7500, they've got a Sigma 150 to 600, they just bought the Nikon Z6II, and he was having trouble sort of working out everything, and he said, listen, I've seen you around, what are the autofocus modes that you use when you're photographing birds? So we got to chatting and I showed him my autofocus modes. As he left, it got me thinking, how many people know which are the best autofocus modes and which are not the best autofocus modes for bird photography? The Nikon Z6II is a great camera, but like all cameras, you've got to know which autofocus modes to use, which metering modes to use to get the best out of your bird photography. So I stayed back a bit and I took quite a few photos in the 4 autofocus modes that I use on a regular basis, which are single point, dynamic area AF, wide area AF small, and auto area with tracking. Let's get into the video and I will show you with sample photos how each autofocus mode works and the differences between them, when you should use them and when you shouldn't use them. So this is what I see in the I menu in my Nikon Z6II. Everything in today's video is in reference to the Z6II. I will show you which autofocus mode you should use and which you should not use. When we're in the I menu, we press OK, and our next screen shows us the 9 autofocus modes that we can choose. We have single point, dynamic area AF, wide area AF small, wide area AF large, wide area AF large for people, wide area AF large for animals, animals meaning cats and dogs, not birds. And today we're talking about bird photography. Then we have auto area AF. You could also have auto area AF with tracking. Then we have auto area AF for people, auto area AF animals. These are the 4 autofocus modes that I use for bird photography. We have single point AF, dynamic area AF, wide area AF small, and auto area AF. Do not use the other 5 modes because they are not good for birds. These are the only 4 that you should use for bird photography. The first one is single point AF. This is my go-to mode most of the time, and it is very easy to use single point AF. This is what it looks like when you're using single point AF. You have a small red square that you can put on the eye or on the body of a bird. This bird is a comb-crested jacana using single point. I only took 6 photos at 5.5 frames per second because this is the maximum in high continuous, and there was 6 in focus and 0 not in focus. I took more photos than this, but they were all in focus, and this is why I normally just use single point AF because it is very reliable. Now I'm just tracking this bird as it's moving along on top of the water. The next bird is a little willy wagtail, and it was just skipping along this little log in front of me. 21 photos, and I was using continuous high extended, which gives me the ability of shooting in 14 frames per second. 21 were in focus, 0 were not in focus. It's just jumping along, and I'm doing a fairly good job of trying to keep it there, just moving along. It's not moving too much, so I'm not having too much of a hard time using the 14 frames per second. Now this is my second most often used autofocus mode. It is dynamic area AF, but I have found that sometimes this lets me down, especially if I'm shooting low to the ground. There is foreground matter, and sometimes it doesn't focus on the bird. There's a small red square and we have 8 little red dots surrounding it. The way dynamic area AF works is that the center point is your main point. If it can't focus on something, the other points take over. If your subject is within these points, it will lock on to that. But I have found sometimes, even though my bird is in the center, it will focus in front or behind, depending on the foreground. It is very problematic for me, but I do use it at times where I feel that if the bird's moving a little bit more, I won't use single point, I will use Dynamic-area AF. First set here is comb-crested jacanas, 6 photos at 5.5 frames per second. They're all in focus. You can see again the bird is just moving and it's not showing the points, all it's showing is the square. But I'm recording the LCD screen at the back, so all I'm seeing is where the bird is focused. I'm not seeing that sort of crosshair look. Now this next one here is a willy wagtail, and you can see Dynamic-area AF, 23 photos at 14 frames per second. Only 9 were in focus. 14 of them were not in focus. And you have to understand that when you're shooting at 14 frames per second with the Z6II, the reaction time of the autofocus system in the camera will let you down at times. Be warned that shooting at 14 frames per second, you may not get all your photos in focus. So here's a little willy wagtail. It was just preening and it was just jumping around. So I was just trying to keep it in the center, so when it took off, and you can see now the photos are out of focus, and it's going to take a while before the camera will lock back on to the willy wagtail. There, it's finally locked on right at the end. The next mode I like using is wide area AF. This is what wide area AF looks like on your viewfinder. It's a much bigger square box. Now I use wide area AF small when the bird is on its own. For example, a pelican that's on the water, or if I'm photographing a kingfisher that's coming into a nest, it's just giving me a little bit wider area for me to lock onto the bird. I will not use wide area AF small, but for a wren that's in a tree with foliage around it, your chances of focusing on the foreground or the background is much higher. This dusty moorhen, 10 photos, 5.5 frames per second, 10 in focus. Now it had no trouble locking onto the moorhen, but if the moorhen had been closer to the log and gone behind the log, then it would have focused on the log and not on the moorhen. Now this is the perfect example of when I like to use wide area AF small. These welcome swallows were coming in, landing on the top of this dead tree. I just locked on to the top of the tree, and whenever they came round, I just fired off a burst. 30 photos at 14 frames per second, and all were in focus. And this is the problem shooting at 14 frames per second. You never know when the camera is going to give you all your photos in focus, or if it's going to just decide to go out of focus and then take some time to get back into focus. You can see here the welcome swallows are moving quite quickly, but all these birds were in focus. Auto area AF is my least often used focus mode because I use it with tracking. I've had hit and misses if I try to use it for a bird that's taking off from a tree. Most of the time it just doesn't keep up with the bird, and it should keep up with it, but it doesn't. If an egret is going to dive down catching fish, I will use it on that because the egret's not moving much, but for a bird that's flying through the sky, it doesn't. So this is auto area AF, and I've set up my Z6II that the FN1 button at the front activates subject tracking. I've pressed the FN1 button, it's showing press OK for subject tracking. If you don't press OK, it tries to find the subject. The red rectangles here showing that it hasn't really locked in. It's trying to find something. And this is what auto area AF does. It tries to find something. Once you activate subject tracking, you get this white box. And you move the white box with the joystick at the back to where you want. And then once you press the autofocus back button on, it goes yellow. So as soon as it's gone yellow, you've got to hold your back button autofocus on, and then it will track the bird wherever it goes. That is in theory. And this is what it's supposed to do. Now I'm just moving the camera to show if the bird's moving around, but it doesn't do this very well. Once you finish taking your photos and you release the back button autofocus, it goes white again. And to get out of subject tracking, you have the little minus key. If you press that, it will exit out of subject tracking, like so. So this is Dusty Moorhen, auto area AF with subject tracking, 14 photos at 5.5 frames per second, and all were in focus because the bird didn't move too much. Now this is Dusty Moorhen, you can see it's locked on, but you will see that it's finding it hard keeping exactly where I want it to go. It's just very haphazard. You can see it like it's tracking, but it's not very accurate in tracking where it's supposed to be. Now this is the comb-crested jacana again. in auto area AF with subject tracking, 29 photos at 14 frames per second, 17 in focus, 12 out of focus, nearly half. Even though it's hardly moving, look, it's already gone out of focus, and it shouldn't do this. This is why this is my least often used mode. You see, it shouldn't have any problem. Now it's back in focus, and sometimes it just jumps back out of focus. It's out of focus again, and at 14 frames a second, it just takes its time to lock back into focus. So thanks for watching. If you've got any questions about autofocus modes, leave it in the comment box below. Stay safe, enjoy your bird photography, and I'll see you next time.